Hey there, sleepyheads, glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Dawn arrived like a patient breath, pale and unafraid, and in that gentle hour Vera followed the soft path her feet always knew, down past the sleeping hedges to the reflection pool. The surface was still, a sheet of glass the color of early milk, except for a single circle of ripples spreading outward from the center, regular as a heartbeat. At first she thought a leaf had fallen. Then she saw the child, small as a bundle of swaddled light, cradled by the water as if the pool itself had remembered how to hold something precious. The baby didn't cry. Her eyes were open and listening, dark as the pool's depths, as if the world were saying something delicate that only she could hear. Vera knelt, the old boards of the footbridge murmuring beneath her knees. Mist clung to the child like a shawl of breath, and in its thinning threads, Vera glimpsed impossible reflections. The same sky stitched with different clouds, the same hill touched with winter frost that shouldn't exist in summer, the same pool lit by lantern light that wasn't there. She had attended 100 births and a handful of deaths, and had never been frightened by the thresholds between things. She wasn't frightened now. She set both hands into the water. It was neither cold nor warm, but a quiet, welcome temperature that felt like being remembered by something ancient and kind. The baby turned her small face toward Vera's fingers, as if recognizing an old friend arriving precisely on time. The water around the child shimmered with images that defied explanation, glimpses of this same moment painted in different colors, experienced through infinite gentle variations, as if this tiny being existed in conversation with all the versions of herself across countless, tender realities. "There you are," Vera whispered, and the sound of her voice seemed to calm the ripples. She lifted the child free, and the mist unraveled without protest, drifting away like a soft exhale returning to morning. On the far side of the pool, a second dawn blinked and faded, a trick of light, she told herself aloud, though in her chest another part of her understood that some truths prefer to appear as gentle tricks of perception. She wrapped the child in her shawl, the one that smelled faintly of thyme and wood smoke, and the baby settled with perfect contentment. Not asleep, not restless, simply present, as if presence were a skill she had brought with her, from wherever souls begin their journeys. Vera sat for a time and listened with the child, hearing the birds beginning their first small inventions of song, that tentative testing of throat before the full chorus of day. "What shall we call you?" she asked, though she did not expect an answer. The child's gaze slipped past Vera's shoulder, up toward the moon that hadn't quite let go of the night. A thin white crescent hung there, patient as a kept promise. Luna, Vera thought, the name arriving with the ease of breath. She gave it to the child without ceremony, because some ceremonies are better kept as kindness held steady over time. When they rose to leave, the boards of the bridge sounded their familiar note, and the water gave back its ripples slowly, as if reluctant to forget what it had witnessed. Vera tucked Luna against her heart and walked the path home, choosing quiet over wonder shared too quickly, understanding that some miracles need time to settle into the world like seeds, finding their proper soil. Vera's cottage welcomed them with the quiet embrace of a place that had learned to hold life gently. The hearth's embers stirred themselves awake as she crossed the threshold, and the hanging bundles of lavender and sage sweetened the air with their patient fragrance. She set Luna in the wicker basket kept for newborns, lined with wool that had been blessed by grateful mothers, and warmed a little goat's milk in a small pan, adding the briefest kiss of honey. The child drank without hurry, eyes open and listening, calm as rain accepted by thirsty earth. When Luke, the old tabby who had never trusted strangers, crept from his hiding place to press his whiskered cheek against the basket's edge and purr at Luna's tiny fingers, Vera accepted it as the first gentle sign that this was meant to be. It was while tidying the small mirror above the wash basin that Vera first noticed something delicate and strange. In the polished surface, she glimpsed herself reaching for a different towel, one that hung precisely where her blue one should be, but wasn't quite the same shade. The reflection moved a heartbeat before her hand did, as if remembering a gesture from yesterday or tomorrow. She paused, cloth suspended mid-wipe, and watched herself complete a motion she hadn't made, in a room that was hers but somehow arranged with different kindness. Luna made a soft sound from her basket, not quite a coo, more like someone agreeing with a conversation held just beyond hearing. When Vera glanced toward her, the child's dark gaze was fixed on the mirror, her small face wearing an expression of recognition, as if these doubled images were exactly what she expected to find in this new world. Over the following days, the mirrors throughout the cottage began their quiet rebellion against singular reflection. The window glass would show Luna sleeping in afternoon light that fell from a different angle, warmer and more golden than the light that actually touched her face. In the polished surface of the copper kettle, Vera caught glimpses of herself moving through the same tasks but with subtly different rhythms, her dress a shade of green she had never owned, her hair braided in a pattern she had never learned. Luna watched these gentle inconsistencies with the calm attention of someone reading a familiar story. She didn't startle when reflections failed to match their sources, didn't fuss when shadows fell in patterns that defied the sun's position. Instead, she seemed to find comfort in the soft multiplicity, as if the cottage had learned to speak her native language of overlapping possibilities. Vera began moving more thoughtfully through her daily tasks, not from fear but from a growing awareness that each moment might be echoing across multiple gentle realities. She would sometimes catch herself pausing before the looking glass by the door, glimpsing the shadow of a life where different choices had been made, different paths taken. But these visions brought no sorrow, only a quiet understanding that love finds countless ways to express itself. That kindness transcends any single set of circumstances. In the evenings, when she rocked Luna by the firelight, Vera would speak softly about the day's small choices, not as lessons, but as gentle acknowledgments of the dance of possibility that surrounded each breath. "Shall we choose the chamomile tea tonight, little one?" she might murmur, and Luna would offer a soft sigh, as if agreeing with decisions made across all the tender variations of that moment. The cottage became a vessel for these quiet mysteries, holding Luna's unique perception like a precious, delicate bloom that needed only patience and acceptance to flourish in its own gentle time. As the seasons turned and Luna grew from the quiet infant who listened to impossible whispers into a child whose presence felt like a gentle hum threading through Vera's cottage, her unusual gift began to reveal its true nature. It wasn't simply about glimpsing alternate reflections in mirrors or sensing the echo of different light through window glass. What bloomed within Luna was something far more profound, a way of experiencing the emotional texture of moments that included not just what was, but all the tender ways each instant could unfold. Vera first understood the depth of this perception on an ordinary Tuesday morning when she was preparing chamomile tea. Luna, now walking with the careful dignity of someone who carried invisible responsibilities, paused in her play with the wooden animals and tilted her small head as if tuning herself to a frequency only she could hear. "The blue cup today, Mama Vera," she said softly, reaching past the green one that Vera had intended to offer. "It wants to hold something gentle." Vera followed Luna's guidance and found, as she poured the golden tea into the blue ceramic cup, that it did indeed feel exactly right for a morning that seemed to need that particular shade of comfort. This became their rhythm, Luna sensing not just what was happening, but perceiving the emotional resonance of all the choices that danced around each moment, then offering small gestures that helped reality unfold along its kindest possible pathways. Sideways seeing, Vera began calling it, watching how Luna would sometimes pause mid-sentence, her dark eyes growing distant, as if she were listening to a conversation held just beyond the edge of hearing. In those moments, Luna wasn't confused about what was real. She was experiencing reality, with a richness that included the gentle shadows of what could be. When the baker's wife visited with worry lines creased deep around her eyes, Luna would sense not just the spoken concerns about her husband's cough, but also the parallel versions of that same worry, where different words of comfort had been offered, where hope had been allowed to bloom instead of wither. The child learned to navigate these layers of possibility like someone reading a familiar symphony, hearing not just the main melody of what was actually said, but the quiet harmonies of all the words that might have been chosen, all the gestures that could have bridged the spaces between hearts. It gave her a patience that seemed ancient, a way of waiting for the full emotional spectrum of each moment to settle before she responded with exactly the kindness that was needed. One evening, as summer storm clouds gathered like grey wool above the cottage, Luna demonstrated the profound empathy that lived within her gift. Thunder rolled across the hills in long conversational rumbles, and rain began its urgent drumming against the windows. But instead of settling by the warm hearth as she usually did during storms, Luna pressed her small hands against her heart, tears sliding down her cheeks in quiet streams that had nothing to do with fear. "What is it, little moon?" Vera asked, gathering Luna into her arms with the instinctive tenderness of someone who understood that some sorrows needed to be held before they could be understood. Luna leaned into the embrace, her voice soft as rainfall on leaves. "In some places the storm is too frightening," she whispered. "There are people who don't have warm houses like ours, and their worry lives right next to our safe storm. I can feel how scared they are, Mama Vera, as if their fear were happening here too." In that moment, Vera finally grasped the full weight of Luna's perception. The child didn't simply see alternate realities. She experienced the emotional truth of infinite gentle variations, carrying genuine feeling for all the ways each moment touched different hearts with different measures of joy or sorrow. Luna existed in a state of profound empathy that transcended the boundaries of singular experience, understanding that every instant was part of a vast, interconnected tapestry where kindness in one thread could strengthen the whole weaving. "What do we do with such big feelings?" Vera asked, not because she needed the answer, but because she wanted Luna to discover her own wisdom. Luna was quiet for a long moment, listening to something beyond the storm's immediate voice. "We hold them gently," she said finally, "like holding a bird that's tired from flying. We can't stop the other storms, but we can make this one as warm as possible, and somehow that helps all of them." That night, they lit an extra candle and placed it in the window, a small beacon that existed across multiple realities, offering its modest light to anyone who might need to find their way home through whatever weather was theirs to weather. And as Luna fell asleep to the sound of rain gentling into whispers, Vera understood that they were raising not just a child, but a soul called to tend the delicate currents that help love find its way between worlds. The morning after the storm brought more than just cleared skies and the sweet scent of rain-washed earth. It brought Kale, though neither Luna nor Vera could have known that the soft knock at their door would introduce the steady presence that would become Luna's anchor in the flowing currents of infinite possibility. Vera had just pinched out the candle they'd left burning in the window. Its wax pooled like a small golden pond around the spent wick when the gentle rap came against the wooden door. On the threshold stood a woman with tired but grateful eyes, holding the hand of a boy whose freckled face carried the serious expression of someone who had spent a long night listening to adult worries he couldn't quite understand. "We saw your light through the rain," the woman said, her voice soft, with the particular gratitude of someone who had found safety when they needed it most. "I'm Mara, and this is my son, Kale. We were helping my brother secure his roof after the wind took half his shingles, and on our way home we lost the path in the darkness. Your candle kept us true." Kyle stepped slightly forward, reaching into his pocket to produce a small wooden horse, carved with careful hands, but missing one ear from some forgotten adventure. "Thunder got caught in the storm too," he said simply, offering the toy to Luna, as if he understood instinctively that she would know exactly what to do with a wounded thing that still remembered how to fly. Luna accepted Thunder with the gentle reverence she brought to all broken, beautiful things, turning him over in her small hands while her dark eyes grew distant with that particular listening look Vera had learned to recognize. But this time something was different. Instead of the usual soft confusion that crossed people's faces when Luna seemed to hear conversations held just beyond the edge of hearing, Kale simply waited, his grass-green eyes patient and accepting, as if he had always known that some people needed extra time to gather all the pieces of a moment before they could respond. "He doesn't need both ears to remember flying," Luna said finally, her voice carrying that gentle certainty that came when she had processed all the tender variations of a single truth. "See, the wind can still find him. Sometimes losing something makes space for something else to grow stronger." From that first exchange, their friendship unfolded with the natural ease of water finding its proper course. Kale began visiting regularly, bringing small offerings that felt exactly right for a cottage that held so much quiet mystery, smooth stones that fit perfectly in Luna's palm, lengths of string for no particular purpose, except the pleasure of tying careful knots, wildflowers that seemed to have chosen themselves for picking. What made their bond extraordinary wasn't that Cale understood Luna's gift in any intellectual way, but that he accepted it with the wholehearted trust of someone who recognized kindness when he encountered it, regardless of the unusual forms it might take. When Luna would pause mid-sentence, her attention drifting toward frequencies only she could hear, Kyle learned to offer his steady presence like a lighthouse beam, not to pull her back to singular reality, but to help her navigate safely through all the gentle possibilities she was processing. They spent long afternoons by the reflection pool where Luna had been found, sharing jam sandwiches and watching the water catch fragments of sky. Cale would skip stones across the far end, while Luna sat in comfortable stillness, sometimes laughing softly at conversations he couldn't hear, sometimes growing thoughtful with the weight of sorrows that existed in parallel to their peaceful moment. "What do you see when you go quiet like that?" Cale asked one afternoon, not with the hungry curiosity of someone seeking entertainment, but with the genuine interest of a friend who wanted to understand how the world looked through different eyes. Luna considered his question with the careful attention she brought to all important things, watching the ripples from his latest stone spread across the water's surface in perfect, patient circles. "I see all the ways this moment could be happening," she said finally. "Sometimes you're throwing different stones, or we're sitting on the other side of the pool, or the sun is falling through the trees at a different angle. But mostly I feel how all those other versions are just as real and just as gentle as this one. It's like being trusted with a secret about how much kindness the world contains, even when we can't see all of it at once." Kyle nodded, understanding settling in his chest, like a bird finding its roost. He couldn't perceive the infinite variations Luna experienced, but he could feel the profound empathy that lived within her gift, the way she carried genuine care for all the ways each moment touched different hearts with different measures of joy or sorrow. As summer deepened and their friendship grew roots, Cale became more than Luna's companion. He became her safe harbor in the vast ocean of possibility that surrounded every instant. His steady presence didn't anchor her to one reality, but gave her a trusted shore from which she could safely explore all the gentle seas of what was, what could be, and what tenderly might unfold between one breath and the next. The traveling merchant arrived on an afternoon when the air hung heavy with the promise of change, his cartwheels marking a slow, deliberate rhythm against the dusty path that wound toward Vera's cottage. Luna felt his approach before she saw him, her small hands pausing over the wooden animals she and Cale had been arranging in careful processions across the worn kitchen. "Table, someone's coming who carries many different sorrows," she said softly, her dark eyes growing distant with that particular listening quality Cale had learned to recognize. His heart holds the same story told in so many ways, like a song with verses that never quite learned to harmonize. Vera looked up from the herbs she was bundling for drying, her weathered hands already reaching for the blue ceramic cups that Luna somehow always knew would offer exactly the right kind of comfort. Through the open window, they could see the figure emerging from the tree line, a man whose shoulders curved with the particular weight of someone who had spent too many years walking away from the places where he was most needed. When he knocked, his voice carried the dusty politeness of someone accustomed to being welcomed briefly and forgotten quickly. "Good afternoon. I'm Tobias, and I wonder if you might spare some water for a thirsty traveler and his old donkey." "Water first, then tea," Vera said, already moving toward the kettle. "Both are freely given here." Luna studied Tobias as he settled gratefully onto the bench beside their door, his cart laden with beautiful objects that somehow felt lonely despite their craftsmanship. In her perception, she could sense the complex symphony surrounding him. Infinite variations of the same life story where different choices had been made, where love had won over profit, where the call of distant roads hadn't drowned out the quiet voices of those who had needed him to stay. "These are beautiful," Luna said, running her fingers over a carved wooden box that caught the afternoon light like captured sunshine. "But they feel like they're missing something important. The hands that made them with love, maybe." Something shifted in Tobias's weathered face, as if Luna's simple observation had touched a truth he'd been carrying without naming. "The woman who carved that lived in a mountain village where I spent 3 seasons, he said quietly. She had grandchildren who would sit beside her while she worked, learning the old patterns, I should have stayed to learn them too. Luna poured tea into the blue cup and offered it with both hands, her gesture carrying a formality that seemed older than her years. In some places you did stay, she said gently, her voice carrying the quiet certainty that came when she had processed all the tender variations of a single truth. I can feel those other stories living right beside this one, where you learned the flower patterns and taught them to new grandchildren. Those versions of you aren't lost, Mr. Tobias. They're just living in different rooms of the same house. As the afternoon deepened and Tobias shared stories of his travels, Luna's gift allowed her to help him reframe each memory with compassion rather than regret. When evening came and he prepared to continue his journey, he pressed a small silver mirror into Luna's hands. "For the child who sees with such generous eyes," he said. "May it always show you the kindness that lives in every reflection." As his cart disappeared around the bend, rolling now with the lighter rhythm of someone who had learned to carry his choices with peace rather than condemnation, Luna held the mirror up to catch the last golden light, seeing in its surface not just her own face but glimpses of all the infinite gentle ways that healing could unfold when hearts were met with understanding rather than judgment. The silver mirror Tobias had left behind found its place on the windowsill, where morning light could reach it first, and in its polished surface, Luna began to discover that her gift was not simply about seeing what could be, but about learning to tend the gentle currents that helped each moment become its kindest possible self. Unlike the other mirrors in Vera's cottage that showed fleeting glimpses of adjacent possibilities, this one seemed to respond to Luna's growing understanding, revealing patterns in the way choices rippled outward, like stones dropped into still water. Vera watched with quiet fascination as Luna developed what could only be called a practice with the mirror, holding it at different angles to catch light that seemed to come from sources beyond the immediate sun. "What are you learning, little moon?" she asked one evening as they prepared chamomile tea together, Luna automatically reaching for the blue cups that would hold exactly the right shade of comfort for a day filled with small discoveries. Luna turned the mirror over in her hands, its surface catching the firelight and throwing dancing patterns across the cottage walls. "It's like learning to read the weather of feelings," she said thoughtfully. "Before a storm you can sense the change in the air, the way the light shifts and birds grow quiet. I'm learning to feel the same thing about moments before they happen, to sense which version of what's coming will bring the most peace." That evening, as the last light painted the cottage windows in hues of rose and lavender, Vera drew Luna close by the hearth, understanding that the time had come for deeper teaching. "Your eyes see more than most and your heart feels deeper," she began, her voice soft as settling ashes. "This sideways seeing of yours, it's not about changing what has been or forcing what will be. Think of it as experiencing the complete emotional spectrum of each moment. Every breath we take, every word we speak, every choice we make, it echoes. It ripples across all the gentle variations of existence." Luna listened with the profound attention she brought to all important things, watching the flames flicker with their own hidden narratives. "Each instant contains infinite potential for kindness, for growth, for peace," Vera continued. "And your gift is to sense which way the current flows, and to add your own gentle strength to guide it toward the softest shore." From that conversation forward, Luna began to understand her role not as someone who controlled outcomes, but as someone who could feel the emotional current that ran beneath the surface of all interactions, learning to move with it rather than against it. When the baker's wife came seeking advice about her restless toddler, Luna would pause for the briefest moment, sensing all the ways comfort could be offered, then choose the specific combination of gentle words and careful listening that would help the conversation unfold along its most healing pathway. She learned that influence was not a hand on the wheel, but a steady presence that encouraged each moment to discover its own capacity for grace. The current, as she began thinking of it, was always moving, always responsive to the quality of attention and intention brought to each interaction. When the blacksmith's apprentice fumbled his tools and colored with embarrassment, Luna would offer a simple observation about the sweet sound of metal finding its proper rhythm. And somehow the shame would loosen, the current would brighten, and the young man would remember that learning was just another word for growing. There were gentle mistakes, the kind that taught without wounding. Once, sensing the shadow of harsh words that might have been spoken over a neighbor's broken fence, Luna offered a solution too quickly, before the moment had revealed its own readiness for resolution. She felt the slight snag in the weave of possibility, a tug where there should have been ease. That evening she told Vera about it with honest concern. Even rivers braid and unbraid. Vera smiled into her tea. You didn't break anything. You learned the tempo. After that, Luna practiced patience like a craft, taking 3 slow breaths before responding to any request for help, letting each moment show her its own rhythm before adding her voice to its gentle song. As autumn painted the hills in shades of rust and gold, Luna's understanding deepened into something that felt less like seeing and more like participating in a vast, loving conversation that included all the voices of what could be. She was learning to trust the intelligence that lived within every situation, recognizing her role as someone who could help that intelligence express itself most fully through the simple act of choosing kindness again and again, in each small moment as it arrived like a gift offered by time itself. The silver mirror reflected not just Luna's face, but the growing wisdom in her dark eyes, the deepening understanding that she was being called to tend something precious, the spaces between what was and what could be, where love could take root and flourish across all the tender dimensions of existence. The first frost of early winter arrived with Iris, painting the morning in crystalline clarity that made every breath visible as small silver clouds, and every footstep ring with particular precision against the hardened earth. Luna felt her approach while standing at the window with Tobias's mirror, watching how the pale light caught the bare branches in their new stillness. When she paused in that familiar way, that meant she was sensing the layered possibilities surrounding a significant arrival. Someone's coming, who carries beautiful work in her hands. Luna said softly to Vera, who was preparing their morning tea with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to trust her child's unusual perceptions. But she also carries uncertainty about whether her gifts will find welcome here. In some places, doors close before she can even speak her purpose. Through the frost-etched glass, they could see the figure making her way along the path. A young woman with dark hair braided simply, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had walked many unfamiliar roads in search of something she couldn't quite name. Her worn traveling pack suggested long journeys, and the wooden shuttle that hung on a cord around her neck spoke of skills carried from distant places where different patterns had been learned and loved. When Iris knocked, her voice carried that particular combination of hope and wariness that comes with seeking new beginnings in unknown territory. "I'm looking for the Master Weaver," she said, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I've traveled from the eastern valleys, hoping there might be room for another apprentice to learn the old patterns." Luna stepped forward, with a cup of warm tea offered in both hands, her gesture carrying the formal respect she reserved for moments that required special care. "The patterns want to be learned," she said simply, her dark eyes holding Iris's gaze with gentle certainty. "And your hands already know some of their secrets. They're just waiting to remember the rest." As they walked together toward Hannah's workshop, Luna felt the complex symphony of possibilities that surrounded this meeting. In her perception, she could sense versions where the Master Weaver's legendary sharpness turned Iris away, where pride or suspicion built walls between teacher and potential student, where this morning ended in disappointment rather than discovery. But she could also feel the tender variations where understanding bloomed, where the shuttle around Iris's neck would be recognized as evidence of genuine devotion to the craft. The workshop sat with its back to the wind, windows full of looms, and the accumulated wisdom of decades spent coaxing beauty from simple threads. Hannah looked up from a warp the color of winter sky, her eyes as sharp as needle points, assessing this newcomer with the particular intensity of someone who had seen too many apprentices arrive with enthusiasm, but depart when the work proved more demanding than they'd imagined. Luna set the silver mirror on the windowsill with careful precision, angling it to catch a slant of morning light that warmed the room without announcing itself. The reflected brightness moved across Hannah's work like a blessing, and in that subtle shift of atmosphere, Luna felt the emotional current begin to flow toward its gentler possibilities. "Show me your hands," Hannah said, her voice carrying professional assessment rather than welcome, but not unkindness either. Iris held them out, palms marked with the honest calluses and small scars that spoke of years spent learning to listen to thread and shuttle. to understand the conversation between warp and weft that created something beautiful from separate strands. Hannah turned Iris's hands over with the careful attention of someone reading a story, written in skin and muscle memory. "What do you remember of your first teacher?" she asked, and Luna felt the moment balance on the edge between acceptance and dismissal. "The song my mother hummed when the weft refused to cooperate," Iris answered, her voice soft but steady. "And how she taught me that every cloth needs one thread left slightly loose, so it can breathe and move with the seasons." Something in Hannah's weathered face softened at the mention of that old wisdom, a recognition passing between teacher and student that transcended words. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the bench beside the loom. "Let's see if your hands remember what your heart has kept." Iris's first attempts carried the hesitation of someone translating between different dialects of the same language. Her rhythm was slightly off, her tension inconsistent, but underneath the uncertainty, Luna could sense the deep knowledge that lived in her fingers, waiting to find its voice in this new place with these unfamiliar tools. On the third pass of the shuttle, something shifted. The thread found its proper relationship with the warp, the rhythm settled into its natural cadence, and the room itself seemed to exhale with satisfaction. Hannah's hand came to rest on Iris's shoulder, not approval yet, but permission to continue. Recognition that this young woman carried within her the patience and respect that true craft required. "You'll stay through the winter," Hannah said, the words feeling like stitches securing two pieces that had been seeking each other across distance and time. "We'll see what patterns want to emerge when spring returns." As afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, Luna picked up the mirror again and glimpsed, for just a breath, the dozen other ways this meeting might have unfolded. She felt them all settle into gratitude, those parallel possibilities relieved by the kindness that had been chosen here, the door that had opened instead of closing, the welcome that had been offered to hands that carried beauty from distant places. That evening, as they walked home through air that tasted of snow soon to come, Luna reflected on what she had learned about her gift. It wasn't about controlling outcomes or forcing particular results, but about sensing the emotional weather of each moment and adding her own small influence to help it unfold along its most generous pathway. Like tending a garden where the seeds were made of trust and the soil was composed of countless small gestures of recognition, each one helping reality choose its kindest possible expression. Winter settled over the village like a gentle meditation, painting the familiar world in crystalline stillness that made every breath visible and every footstep ring with particular clarity against the hardened earth. In this hushed season, Luna discovered that her gift was evolving from something she experienced into something she could consciously tend, like learning to work with a river's current rather than fighting against its natural flow. The understanding deepened on a morning when Mrs. Holloway arrived at their door, her usual cheerful demeanor shadowed by worry lines that spoke of sleepless nights. Her youngest son had been running a fever for 3 days, and despite remedies, the child remained listless and pale. As she described her concerns, Luna felt the familiar expansion of her awareness, sensing not just this conversation, but all the gentle variations surrounding it. Moments where different words of comfort could be offered, where hope might be nurtured instead of fear. "Let me gather some healing herbs," Vera said, already moving toward her collection. But Luna stepped forward with a different kind of offering, her voice carrying the quiet certainty that had grown stronger with each season. "Mrs. Holloway," she said gently, "in your worry, you're imagining all the frightening things that could happen. But what if you tried imagining all the gentle ways this could unfold instead? Worry is love with nowhere to go. But when we give love a direction toward hope, toward trust in healing, it becomes medicine instead of poison." Something shifted in Mrs. Holloway's face as she considered these words. The tight lines around her eyes softened, her breathing deepened from shallow gasps of anxiety to something more steady and grounded. She left carrying both Vera's herbs and a different quality of attention, her step regaining some of its natural lightness as she disappeared through the falling snow. Later that afternoon, at the village market, Luna felt another snag in the weave of atmosphere before voices rose. 2 neighbors reached the same stall simultaneously, both needing the last sack of winter apples. The situation offered a dozen outcomes: hurt pride, hard words, the dull ache that lingers after small unkindness. Luna paused and let the moment show its shape, sensing the emotional current that could flow toward conflict or cooperation. She picked up an apple and polished it on her sleeve until it shone like a patient star, then offered it to the small child, fidgeting at one neighbor's side. While the child bit into crisp sweetness with a sound that reset the air, Luna shifted the sack so its twine loosened naturally, allowing apples to roll into two neat piles without making a mess of anyone's dignity. "It looks like they wanted to be shared," she observed, not as a suggestion, but as a simple noticing. Relief arrived like spring thaw. The current moved on, brighter for having met so little resistance. That evening, as she sat with Kale by the reflection pool, Luna tried to explain what she was learning. "It's like being a gardener for feelings," she said, watching ice patterns dance with flowing water. "I can't make flowers grow where they don't belong, but I can help create conditions where they're more likely to bloom. Every moment is a collaboration between choice and chance, and my role is to add my voice to help each instant choose its kindest expression." Kyle nodded with the deep understanding that had grown between them. He couldn't perceive the infinite variations Luna experienced, but he recognized when she was working with the gentle currents of possibility, helping moments become their most loving selves. As snow began falling again, Luna reflected on how her gift was becoming less about seeing alternate realities and more about the art of gentle influence, learning to trust the intelligence that lived within every situation, offering her small strength to help love find its way through whatever circumstances presented themselves. One tender moment at a time. The winter solstice brought the village together in the old hall, where lanterns hung like captured stars and the air hummed with fiddles and warm laughter. Luna moved through the gathering with Vera and Kale, accepting a cup of spiced cider and watching Iris share quiet words with Hannah by the hearth. The evening felt woven from contentment, each voice adding its thread to a tapestry of shared celebration that welcomed the promise of returning light. But as the music swelled and more neighbors arrived, Luna felt the familiar expansion of her awareness beginning to stretch beyond comfortable boundaries. At first, it was simply the usual gentle hum of possibilities, sensing the different conversations that could unfold, the various ways laughter might echo through the room. Then the current deepened, and she began to feel not just this celebration, but all the parallel versions where the same evening carried different emotional weather. She sensed Mrs. Holloway's forced smile masking worry about her husband's persistent cough, felt the shadow of young Tom's shame over losing his apprenticeship to careless mistakes, perceived Elder Marion nursing a grudge against the miller that had festered since autumn. Each person brought not just their immediate feelings, but the echo of all the ways their night could unfold, words that might wound, silences that could heal, moments where understanding might bloom or wither, depending on which possibilities chose to manifest. The weight accumulated like snow gathering on branches, beautiful but increasingly heavy. Luna felt herself trying to hold space for every variation simultaneously, her gift expanding beyond her ability to contain it gracefully. She heard not just the fiddler's cheerful tune, but all the songs it could have been, all the different rhythms that might better match the complex emotional undercurrents flowing through the room. When tears began sliding down her cheeks, not her own sorrow but the accumulated ache of infinite gentle variations where grief intruded, where old wounds opened, where the fragile piece of community fractured under unspoken pressures, Luna slipped away into the crystalline night air. Her feet found the familiar path to the reflection pool, drawn by the need for stillness that could hold complexity without demanding solutions. Vera found her sitting on the frozen boards, arms wrapped around herself, as she wept for all the ways human hearts could experience the same moment. "Too much at once, little moon?" Vera asked gently, settling beside her with patient presence. "I can feel every possible sorrow as if it's happening right here," Luna whispered. "In some places, people say cruel things because they're tired. In others, someone stands alone, aching for connection. How do you hold so much without breaking?" Vera drew Luna close, her voice soft as settling snow. "The sorrows you're feeling are all real, but they're not all yours to carry. Your gift isn't to prevent every sadness or guide every moment toward perfect joy. It's to hold space for the full truth of what it means to be human, and to add your own small light to help love find its way through whatever darkness exists." As they sat in winter stillness, Luna felt her understanding shift. She couldn't eliminate suffering from infinite realities, couldn't force every interaction toward harmony, but she could learn to be present with whatever arose, offering gentle influence without attachment to outcomes, trusting that her role was not to control the vast complexity of human experience, but to participate in it with as much love and wisdom as she could manage. When they returned to the hall, Luna moved through the gathering with different attention, still aware of infinite possibilities swirling around each interaction, but no longer trying to hold them all simultaneously. Instead, she offered small gestures of kindness as opportunities arose, understanding that her gift was about helping love find its way through whatever circumstances presented themselves, one tender moment at a time. The weeks following the solstice brought a deeper understanding between Luna and Kale, their friendship maturing into something that felt both ancient and newly discovered, like finding a path that had always existed, but only now revealed itself clearly. He had watched her struggle with the overwhelming flood of possibilities at the celebration, had seen how her gift could expand beyond her ability to navigate its currents gracefully, and in response, he offered something more precious than solutions, his steady presence as a lighthouse in the flowing stream of infinite realities. They developed their own quiet language of support, born from patient observation and genuine care. When Luna would pause mid-sentence, her dark eyes growing distant with that particular listening quality, Kale learned to offer gentle anchors without pulling her back too quickly. 3 breaths, he would say softly, breathing them with her in time to whatever rhythm the moment required. Then tell me what this moment is asking for. Not what you see, but what it needs. One afternoon, as they sat on the old stone wall overlooking the valley, sharing bread still warm from Vera's oven, Luna tried to explain the complexity of her perception. It's like listening to a choir where everyone is singing the same song, but in slightly different keys, she said, her hands shaping invisible harmonies in the air. Sometimes one voice carries sorrow, even when all the others sing joy, and I feel responsible for hearing them all simultaneously. Kyle turned a smooth riverstone over in his palm, considering her words with the thoughtful attention he brought to all important things. Maybe you don't have to hear every voice all the time, he said gently. Maybe you can listen to the one singing right beside you and trust that the others are still there, like clouds beyond the horizon. You know they exist without needing to see them all at once. His simple wisdom resonated through Luna like a bell finding its true note. From that conversation forward, they began developing practical rituals for managing the vast complexity of her gift. Kyle carved a worry stone from cherry wood, smooth and warm with a shallow dimple that fit perfectly under Luna's thumb. For when the room gets too loud, he explained, pressing it into her palm. You touch this and I'll know to stand closer. They tested these techniques like careful scientists, discovering what helped Luna remain grounded while still honoring her extraordinary perception. At the market, when voices began to tangle over the price of winter apples, Luna felt the familiar pull of too many outcomes. She pressed the cherry stone and felt Kyle step beside her, his calm presence widening the space around the moment. Which kindness is closest? He asked quietly, and Luna listened until she found it, a bowl of perfectly ripe pears that no one had noticed. She lifted one, sliced it with her small knife, and the sweet scent shifted the entire atmosphere. People smiled first with their mouths, then with their shoulders, and the moment chose its gentler expression. Kale learned to be what Luna privately thought of as the good kind of wall, one that kept out drafts without blocking light. When curious villagers asked pointed questions about her unusual perceptions, he would deflect with gentle humor or begin an unrelated story that made everyone laugh, giving Luna space to choose how much of herself to offer. He didn't always understand her words, but he understood her quiet, and his understanding became a warm blanket that turned overwhelming nights into peaceful sleep. As spring began painting the world in tender greens, Luna reflected on how friendship could be its own form of gift. Kale's presence didn't diminish her ability to perceive infinite realities. It helped her engage with them more wisely, offering her a safe harbor from which she could explore the gentle seas of possibility without losing herself in their depths. Through his steady care, she was learning that some gifts were meant to be held within relationship, supported by love that anchored itself not in any single reality, but in the enduring truth of hearts that had chosen to care for each other across all the tender dimensions of existence. Spring's gentle awakening brought with it a shift in Luna's daily rhythms. As natural as the unfurling of new leaves along the hedgerows, Vera had been watching her young charge's growing understanding with the patient attention of someone who recognized when gifts were ready to expand into service, and as the morning light grew stronger each day, she began including Luna more deliberately in her rounds through the village. "Your hands know more than kindness now," Vera observed one morning as she packed her worn leather satchel with small glass vials and bundles of dried herbs. "They're learning to listen. Would you like to discover what that listening might serve?" Luna touched the familiar weight of the satchel as Vera settled it across her shoulder, feeling the quiet promise it carried, not just of remedies and bandages, but of the patient attention that made any healing work better. She had been accompanying Vera on occasional visits for months, but something in the quality of this invitation felt different, more purposeful, as if she were being called to step across a threshold she hadn't even known existed. Their first stop was Mrs. Holloway's cottage, where her youngest son had been struggling with a persistent cough that kept the whole family awake. As they entered the warm kitchen, Luna felt the familiar expansion of her awareness, but instead of sensing infinite variations of conversation, she found herself perceiving the illness itself across multiple gentle dimensions. She could feel not just the immediate symptoms, but all the ways healing might unfold, the different pathways by which wholeness could be restored, the various approaches that would meet the least resistance. "The cough wants steam first," Luna said softly, her voice carrying that gentle certainty that came when she had processed all the tender variations of a single truth, but with chamomile, not mint. "And after that it needs quiet songs, not silence. The chest is trying to release something old, but it doesn't want to work so hard at letting go." Vera's weathered hands paused over her collection of remedies, her eyes bright with recognition. Together, they prepared a steam tent fragrant with chamomile and lavender, and Luna found herself humming a melody that seemed to arise from the healing itself, not a song she remembered learning, but one that matched the rhythm of easier breathing, of tension releasing its stubborn grip. As the child's cough gentled and sleep finally came, Mrs. Holloway's shoulders loosened with relief. "How did you know?" she asked Luna quietly, wonder softening her tired features. "Bodies tell stories," Luna replied, words that felt both her own and borrowed from some deeper source of understanding. "Sometimes they tell many stories at once, and we just help them choose which one leads home." Over the following weeks, Luna discovered that her ability to sense emotional variations extended naturally into the realm of physical healing. When the baker arrived with a thumb swollen from an argument with his own hammer, she could feel which remedies would work in harmony with his particular constitution, which treatments would honor both the injury and his embarrassment about the accident. The poultice she suggested included comfrey for the tissue and willow bark for the inflammation, but also a touch of lavender, not for the thumb, but for the pride that was bruised alongside it. Kale often accompanied them on these rounds, carrying the satchel with an easy gravity that made thresholds feel wider when they crossed them. When Luna pressed her cherrywood worry stone, he knew to step closer, or to stand in a doorway and hold the room open with his steady quiet. His presence didn't diminish her growing abilities. It gave her a safe harbor from which she could explore the gentle seas of healing without losing herself in their complexity. "You're learning to be a translator," Vera observed one evening as they walked home through air sweet with apple blossoms. "Between what bodies are trying to say and what hearts are ready to hear, between what hurts and what wants to become whole." Luna nodded, understanding settling in her chest like a bird finding its proper roost. Her gift wasn't just about perceiving infinite realities. It was about helping people find the pathway to healing that honored both their immediate needs and their deeper patterns of growth. She was learning to tend not just individual ailments, but the continuous process by which life moved toward greater harmony, one gentle healing at a time. As they reached the cottage where it all began, Luna felt her sense of purpose crystallizing like morning dew catching the first light. She was being called to serve as a bridge between the world of infinite possibilities and the specific needs of this particular reality, helping others find their way to the wholeness that waited just beyond the edge of what they thought was possible. Late spring folded into early summer with the same patient grace Luna brought to her work. and the village softened into longer evenings, where stories lingered on thresholds, and the scent of warm flax drifted from Hannah's workshop. Iris, who had arrived with frost in her hair and uncertainty in her step, was now woven into the rhythm of the place like a thread that had found its proper pattern. Luna visited often under the pretense of delivering herbs for stiffness or nettle tea for focus, but mostly to listen for the quiet places where kindness could take root and grow. The first time she sensed the new thread humming in Iris's days, it came with the sound of measured hammer blows from the carpenter's shed across the lane. Elias worked there, a craftsman whose hands were steady and whose laugh came rarely but with the certainty of a well-placed nail. He had begun showing up at the workshop with small repairs, a warped heddle straightened, a loom foot sanded smooth, a shuttle balanced so it would glide without courting chaos. Each visit carried a breath of possibility that Luna could feel curling at the edges of conversation, like steam rising from a kettle. In her sideways seeing, Luna perceived not just this courtship, but all the gentle variations it might take. Versions where shyness built walls, others where understanding bloomed like wildflowers, choosing their season, still others where patience learned to speak the same quiet language as hope. She didn't press toward any particular outcome. Instead, she set Tobias's silver mirror on the windowsill where it could gather morning light, tilting it just so, not to cast anyone in a better glow, but to remind the room that gentleness was already present, waiting to be noticed. When Iris looked up from her weaving and caught her reflection beside Hannah's winter blue warp, she seemed to remember that beauty was not separate from usefulness, and that love rarely announced itself with fanfare. It arrived like warm light finding thread, patient as the grain in wood that knew its own direction. Kyle helped carry planks for a new storage bench at the workshop, whistling a tune that smoothed silences so they didn't turn sharp. He and Elias talked about joinery and the pleasure of work that could be trusted once set in place. Iris listened while checking her tension, and Luna felt the moment balance between versions, one where habit kept eyes on the loom, another where curiosity invited conversation to stay a little longer. "What makes wood remember its shape?" Iris asked, fingers pausing over the shuttle. Elias's answer wandered into the patience of trees and the memory in grain, how a board requested respect more than force. The exchange turned the air warm, and Luna sensed 100 gentle futures unfurl from that simple question. There were small hesitations, moments when pride brushed against vulnerability or misunderstanding threatened to build distance. Luna learned to offer chamomile tea without comment during these delicate times, saying lightly, "This tea prefers honesty," as if that were a property listed on its jar. She watched Elias carve a shuttle specifically for Iris's hands, its curve perfectly matched to her grip, and felt the soft joy that rose from all the versions where such gestures existed. At twilight, walking home with Kale along paths that glimmered with moth wings, Luna carried the understanding that some bonds chose their form with infinite patience, like stars waiting for full dark to show themselves. She didn't need to decide the shape of love between Iris and Elias. She only needed to keep the room bright enough for recognition and quiet enough for two steady hearts to hear what was already speaking between them, across all the tender dimensions where love learns to trust itself. Word traveled in the quiet way that wisdom prefers, carried on evening breezes and morning conversations until it reached the ears of those who listened for such things. The scholar arrived on a day when summer light fell through the cottage windows like honey through cheesecloth, his approach gentle enough that Luna sensed curiosity rather than urgency in his footsteps along the familiar path. Ansel introduced himself with the courteous formality of someone who had learned that knowledge was best received when offered with respect rather than demand. His traveling pack bore the worn smoothness of years spent seeking understanding in places where others might see only ordinary days, and his eyes held the patient brightness of someone who collected wisdom like others gathered wildflowers, carefully, gratefully, with attention to the roots as well as the blooms. "I've come to learn about a different way of seeing," he said, accepting Vera's offer of tea with genuine appreciation. "Not to study or measure, but to understand the language you speak with the world, if you're willing to share it." Luna felt the familiar expansion of her awareness, sensing not just this conversation, but all the gentle variations it could take. In Ansel she perceived no sharpness of exploitation, only the warm curiosity of someone who recognized mystery as something to be honored rather than solved. Kyle stepped closer without seeming to move, his steady presence widening the space around the moment, and Vera's weathered hands reached automatically for the blue cups that would hold exactly the right quality of comfort. "What would you like to know?" Luna asked simply, choosing the pathway that led toward genuine exchange rather than interrogation. Ansel leaned forward with the eagerness of someone who had spent years asking questions that most people found either incomprehensible or irrelevant. How do you hold space for infinite possibilities without losing yourself in their complexity? How do you experience multiple realities as gift rather than burden? Luna reached for Tobias's silver mirror, turning it over in her hands like a prayer bead, worn smooth by countless repetitions of seeking. "It's not about seeing different worlds," she said thoughtfully. "It's about feeling the complete emotional spectrum of each moment. I call it sideways seeing, experiencing all the ways kindness could express itself, then helping this reality choose its gentlest pathway." They walked to the reflection pool, where Luna demonstrated her gift, not as phenomenon but as practice. She held the mirror to catch light between water and sky, creating thin bridges that felt like promises, kept from before memory. "I witness all the ways this could be," she said, "and then I choose a response that honors the whole." Ansel's eyes brightened with recognition. "Then perhaps your gift isn't about alternate realities at all," he murmured. "Perhaps it's radical empathy, an ability to hold room for complexity without demanding singular outcomes, a form of first listening that hears what each moment is asking for." Over several days, their conversations deepened into explorations of consciousness that existed in relationship with possibility itself. Ansel documented Luna's insights not as scientific data, but as poetry that happened to be true, preserving wisdom gained through living rather than studying from distance. "What you're describing," he said on his final morning, "suggests that love finds countless ways to express itself across infinite gentle dimensions, and your role is to help it choose its kindest form in this particular reality." As Ansel prepared to continue his journey, carrying new understanding that would reshape his life's work, Luna reflected on how wisdom grew strongest when shared rather than hoarded, when understanding became a gift, offered to help others find their own pathways to the truth that lived within every moment, waiting to be recognized and tended with patient care. The evening of the Festival of Quiet Lights arrived, with air that hummed like a tuning fork struck gently, carrying the scent of bread baked in quantities that suggested celebration rather than mere sustenance. Luna moved through the preparations with Vera and Kale, helping to string lanterns between the old elms that bordered the village green, their colored paper glowing like captured sunset, even before candles were lit within them. This year felt different from the overwhelming flood of possibilities she had experienced during the winter solstice. The conversations with Ansel had helped her understand her gift not as something to be endured, but as a practice to be engaged with wisdom, and she found herself approaching the evening with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to work with currents rather than against them. When she touched the cherrywood worry stone in her pocket, it was not from anxiety, but from the gentle habit of centering herself before stepping into the vast symphony of communal emotion. As neighbors gathered with their offerings, Luna felt the familiar expansion of her awareness, sensing not just this celebration, but all the tender variations it could take. She perceived versions where different songs might be sung, where various stories could unfold, where the same joy expressed itself through infinite gentle pathways. But instead of trying to hold them all simultaneously, she listened for the specific kindness each moment was asking for, then offered her small influence to help it bloom. When young Tom from the bakery stumbled while carrying a tray of honey cakes, sending sweet golden rounds scattering across the wooden planks, Luna felt the moment balance between versions, one where embarrassment bloomed into tears and withdrawal, another where accident transformed into shared laughter. She stepped forward with a cloth, and the kind of smile that suggested spills were simply part of evening's choreography, gathering scattered cakes while humming a tune that turned cleanup into impromptu dance. Tom's shoulders relaxed, his mother's worried frown softened, and the circle of neighbors who had paused to witness the small crisis found themselves helping rather than judging. Near the cider table, Luna noticed the familiar tension between the miller and elder Marion, their old grievance standing like a wall between them, even in the midst of celebration. She positioned Tobias's silver mirror to catch lantern light, creating a soft beam that fell between them as they reached for the same ladle. In that moment of shared illumination, their eyes met not with suspicion, but with the tired recognition of two people who had forgotten why they were angry. "Your wheat held strong through the summer storms," Elder Marion said quietly, the words carrying apology without naming it. "Take some extra apples when you come by," the miller replied, offering forgiveness in the shape of future kindness. Across the green, Iris and Elias sat on the bench he had crafted for two people who might want to share quiet conversation while music played around them. Luna felt the tender possibilities of their evening, moments where words might stumble over their own importance, others where comfortable silence could speak its own language of understanding. She offered them cups of elderflower wine with a gesture that carried blessing without intrusion, her presence helping to create the conditions where love could choose its own gentle pace. As the festival reached its crescendo with lanterns floating on the reflection pool like small prayers made visible, Luna stood with Kale and Vera, watching flames drift among the reeds while stars appeared overhead in answering constellation. She had learned to be not a controller of outcomes, but a tender of possibilities, someone who could help each moment discover its own capacity for grace through the simple act of choosing kindness, patience, and presence whenever the current asked for her voice. Walking home through air that still carried echoes of laughter and the warm scent of shared celebration, Luna understood that her gift was evolving into something both simpler and more profound. The ability to participate in the vast, loving conversation that helped reality choose its most harmonious expression, one gentle moment at a time. The evenings following the festival carried a different quality of light, golden and patient, as if summer were learning the art of graceful transition. It was during these soft twilights that Vera began sharing the stories Luna had been waiting to hear, without knowing she was waiting. Tales that would help her understand her place in the quiet lineage of souls who had learned to tend the spaces between what was and what could tenderly become. They gathered by the reflection pool after the day's healing work was done, watching water catch the last light, while Vera's voice wove narratives that felt both ancient and immediate. Luna sat with Tobias's silver mirror in her lap, its surface reflecting not just the evening sky, but glimpses of all the gentle stories that had led to this moment of learning. There was a woman named Mirren who lived in the mountain valleys. "When I was young," Vera began, her weathered hands cupped around tea that steamed like small prayers in the cooling air. She could feel the emotional weather of entire seasons before they arrived, sensing not just what would happen, but all the tender ways communities could choose to meet whatever was coming. When harsh winters threatened, she didn't prevent the cold, but she helped people prepare with hope instead of fear, and somehow that changed everything. Luna leaned closer, recognizing something familiar in the description. Did she see the other possibilities too? She experienced them, Vera corrected gently. Like you, she felt the complete spectrum of each moment's potential. When drought came to her valley, she could sense all the ways scarcity might unfold, versions where panic took root, others where trust bloomed into unexpected abundance. She learned to add her voice to help each situation choose its most generous expression. As stars emerged one by one, Vera continued with another story. There was Joran the ferryman, who carried people across the wide river that separated two trading towns. He possessed no magic, only the ability to sense the emotional currents flowing beneath each journey. Some passengers carried grief that needed gentle songs to keep it from overwhelming the boat. Others brought joy so light that he could let the current do the work while wonder steered them home. Kale, whittling cherry wood into smooth curves by the water's edge, looked up with interest. He sounds like someone who understood that every crossing was different, even when the river stayed the same. Exactly, Vera smiled. He learned that the safest path wasn't always the most direct one, but the one that honored what each heart was carrying. Like Luna, he discovered that influence comes not from controlling outcomes, but from sensing which direction the current wants to flow and adding just enough gentle strength to help it find its way. Luna felt these stories settling into place, like threads finding their proper pattern in a weaving. Were they lonely carrying such gifts? Vera's eyes grew soft with understanding. They all found their anchors, little moon. Myron worked alongside her brother, who couldn't feel the seasonal weather, but learned to translate her insights into practical guidance their community could follow. Jorin's daughter became his partner, reading his face like a map and knowing when to adjust their course. Gifts like yours are meant to be held within relationship, supported by love that trusts completely even when it doesn't understand everything. From her pocket, Vera drew a simple cord woven from threads Iris had given her, each strand a different shade, but all harmonizing into something stronger than any single color. One thread was left deliberately loose, creating a small flag that caught the evening breeze. "This is for remembering what your first teachers have shown you," Vera said, tying it gently around Luna's wrist. "Let the world breathe around your work. Leave room for the unexpected kindness that wants to emerge." Luna touched the loose thread, feeling it flutter like a tiny banner of permission to trust the current rather than forcing outcomes. "Am I part of something larger than just our village?" "You're part of a conversation that has been continuing since the first heart learned to listen for the spaces between one breath and the next," Vera replied. "Your gift connects you to everyone who has ever chosen gentleness when they could have chosen force, who has sensed the places where love wants to take root and helped create the conditions for it to flourish. You're not alone in this work, little moon. You never have been." As they walked home through air that carried the first hint of autumn's eventual arrival, Luna felt her understanding deepening like roots finding their proper soil. She was part of an ancient tradition of bridge builders, souls called to sense where kindness wanted to bloom and to offer their small strength to help it choose this reality over all the others that danced at the edges of possibility. That night, as moonlight painted silver patterns across her small room, Luna held the cord and felt the loose thread move with her breathing. She understood now that her gift was not about preventing all sorrow or controlling every outcome, but about participating in the vast, patient work of helping love find its way through whatever circumstances arose, trusting that each gentle choice rippled outward through infinite dimensions, touching possibilities she would never see but could always serve. The first breath of autumn arrived with Tobias, painting the morning air crisp and clear, as he guided his cart along the familiar path toward Vera's cottage. Luna felt his approach while bundling late summer herbs, her hands pausing over the sage as she sensed the profound shift in the symphony surrounding him. Where once she had perceived the tangled variations of regret and restless sorrow, now she felt something like music that had finally learned to harmonize with itself. "He carries different stories now," she said softly to Vera, watching the dust cloud that marked his progress. "They're still the same stories, but they've learned to sing together instead of competing for his attention." When Tobias knocked, his weathered face bore the particular peace that comes when someone has made friends with their own choices. His cart still held beautiful objects crafted by distant hands, but each piece seemed to rest in conversation with the others, as if he had become a curator of connections rather than a collector of solitary treasures. "I kept thinking about your words," he said, accepting Vera's tea with the easy grace of someone returning to a place where he had been truly seen. "About the different rooms in the same house. I've spent this year visiting some of those rooms, not to change what happened, but to understand how much love was always present, even in the choices that felt like mistakes." From his pack, he withdrew a small wooden bird, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight, carved with such delicate attention that Luna could almost hear it singing. "I went back to the mountain village where the grandmother taught her patterns," he said, his eyes bright with memory. "I told her I had never forgotten her work, that it had traveled with me, and finally taught me the difference between carrying beauty and hoarding it." Luna held the bird, feeling its smooth warmth and sensing all the gentle variations of this moment. Versions where different gifts might be offered, where various forms of gratitude could bloom. "She remembered you," Luna said with quiet certainty, and Tobias nodded with wonder still fresh in his voice. She laughed and said she had wondered where that particular piece had wandered. "Her granddaughter is grown now with children of her own, and they asked me to stay and help repair their community loom. I found myself lingering, learning their songs, understanding that leaving isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's another way of carrying love from place to place." Kyle, who had been quietly mending a gate hinge, looked up with interest as Tobias unrolled a thumb-smudged map to show the curve of rivers and the paths between distant towns. Something subtle shifted in Cale's expression, not restlessness, but a widening, like a window opening to let in air that carried sense of places beyond the familiar hills. Before departing, Tobias pressed a small compass into Luna's hands, its silver surface catching the afternoon light. "For finding your way between the rooms," he said with a smile that carried the warmth of someone who had learned to navigate by kindness rather than regret. "Though I suspect you already know that the truest direction is always toward greater understanding." As his cart disappeared around the bend, rolling now with the lighter rhythm of someone who had learned to carry his story with gratitude, Luna held the compass and watched its needle settle toward something that felt like the center of all possibilities. She understood that Tobias now carried a piece of her gift, the ability to sense where healing wanted to bloom and to offer his presence as soil where peace could take root. That evening, walking home with Cale through air that tasted of apples considering ripeness, Luna reflected on how wisdom multiplied when shared rather than hoarded, how each person who learned to tend the spaces between what was and what could be became another voice in the vast, patient conversation that helped love find its way through whatever circumstances arose, one gentle choice at a time. The compass Tobias had left behind seemed to pulse with quiet invitation, its needle pointing toward possibilities that lived just beyond the familiar hills. Luna noticed how Cale's attention would drift toward it during their evening conversations, his fingers tracing invisible routes across the worn wood of Vera's kitchen table, the way someone might follow a melody that wanted to be completed in a different key. The shift came gradually, like seasons learning their proper rhythm, until one morning he arrived carrying the particular energy of someone who had spent the night listening to voices that called from beyond the reflection pool's gentle borders. Luna felt the change in him before he spoke, sensing not just this conversation, but all the tender variations it could take. Versions where fear built walls between them, others where understanding bloomed like wildflowers choosing their season. "There's something I need to tell you," Kyle said, settling beside Luna on the stone wall where they had shared so many quiet afternoons. His grass-green eyes held the complex mixture of excitement and sorrow that comes when growth requires temporary separation from what is most loved. "I keep thinking about Tobias's stories, about the ferryman and the mountain village. I want to understand how other places hold themselves together, how the current flows in different valleys." Luna touched the cherrywood worry stone in her pocket and felt the moment balance between infinite possibilities. In some versions, tears came quickly, and words tangled with unspoken fears. In others, clinging transformed love into cage. But in the gentlest pathway, she sensed the profound rightness of his restlessness, understanding that their friendship had grown strong enough to stretch across distance without breaking. "You want to learn your own way of tending kindness," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet certainty that came when she had processed all the gentle variations. "Like the stories Vera tells, but in your own words." Relief bloomed across Cale's weathered features. "My cousin in the northern valley needs help with his harvest. And after that, there's talk of winter work in the ferry town. I'd like to see how other communities weave themselves together, what I might learn about the spaces between what is and what could be." They spent the following weeks creating small rituals without deciding to, understanding that love required new forms when distance entered the conversation. Cale carved Luna a set of wooden bowls, each one sized for different kinds of healing work, their surfaces smooth as river stones and warm as captured sunlight. Luna wove him a travel cloak from wool that Iris had dyed the color of twilight, adding small pockets for the treasures that wandering souls collect along their paths. On his final evening, they walked to the reflection pool where their friendship had deepened into something that could weather any geography. The water caught stars like scattered seeds of light, and Luna pressed Tobias's compass into Cale's hands, understanding that it belonged with someone who would use it to navigate not just between places, but between the spaces where kindness wanted to take root. "Find your own way of reading the current," she said. "Then come home and teach me what you've learned about the different songs that help love find its way." As dawn painted the eastern hills in shades of promise, Kyle shouldered his pack and walked toward the path that would carry him beyond familiar boundaries. Luna stood watching until he disappeared around the bend, feeling not loss but expansion, their friendship growing to include the distances between them, their love learning to exist across all the gentle dimensions where hearts that had chosen each other continued to care, regardless of geography. During his absence, Luna's work deepened with the particular clarity that comes when beloved anchors are temporarily lifted, allowing new strengths to emerge. She learned to navigate the flowing currents of infinite possibility with quiet confidence, understanding that some gifts were meant to be tested by solitude before they could fully mature. When the first snow began to fall, she felt Kyle's approach like warmth spreading through cold air, and knew that what had grown between them during separation would make their reunion not just a return, but a beginning. Winter settled over the village like a gentle meditation, painting the familiar world in crystalline stillness that made every breath visible and every footstep ring with particular clarity against the hardened earth. In this hushed season, Luna discovered new dimensions of her gift, finding that her ability to sense infinite possibilities had grown more precise during Kyle's absence, more responsive to the subtle currents that flowed beneath each moment's surface. The understanding deepened on a night when snow fell in thick, patient flakes that muffled sound and wrapped the world in pearl-soft silence. Luna felt the approach before she heard the familiar knock, 3 soft taps, a pause, then a fourth, the pattern neighbors used when a birth had chosen its hour. Through the frost-etched window, she could see Mrs. Holloway making her way along the path, her usual worry lines softened by something that looked remarkably like trust. "It's my eldest daughter, Sarah," Mrs. Holloway said when Vera opened the door, her voice carrying the particular mixture of excitement and concern that comes when new life prepares to cross the threshold between worlds. "The pains began with the storm, and she's asking for you specifically." Vera looked toward her leather satchel, then at Luna, with eyes that held complete confidence. "You carry more than remedies now, little moon," she said, pressing the worn bag into Luna's hands. "You carry the wisdom to help souls choose their gentlest pathway into this world." Walking through snow that caught moonlight like scattered prayers, Luna felt her awareness expand in ways that would have overwhelmed her in earlier seasons. She sensed not just the laboring mother's immediate needs, but all the tender variations of how this birth could unfold, versions where fear took hold, others where trust bloomed into the kind of strength that moves mountains one breath at a time. The storm itself seemed to offer infinite, gentle possibilities, each snowflake a small blessing for safe passage between dimensions. In the warm cottage where the birthing bed had been prepared, Luna found herself moving with an authority that felt both ancient and newly discovered. Sarah labored with steady courage, her husband keeping rhythm with his breath, love worn into the lines of his palms. Luna felt the familiar expansion of her awareness, but it was different at births, gentler, like being welcomed into a library where every book agreed to speak only in whispers. "The little one is listening to something we can't hear," Luna said softly, her hands gentle on Sarah's belly, as she perceived the baby's readiness across multiple dimensions, sensing not just physical position, but emotional preparation, the soul's willingness to cross the threshold from infinite possibility into this specific, chosen reality. "But I can feel the conversation. She's choosing her moment with great care, waiting for the exact instant when love will be strongest to welcome her home." Luna angled Tobias's silver mirror to catch candlelight, letting its glow pool over the bed like warm milk, and began a low hum that matched the kettle's soft complaint and the snow's even hush. Sarah's breathing found the sound and braided itself to it, and Luna felt the emotional current begin to flow toward its gentlest possibilities. Her gift allowed her to sense which comfort measures would work in harmony with each contraction, which words would offer strength rather than anxiety, how to create the conditions where both mother and baby could navigate their shared journey with maximum peace. Between surges, Luna rested her palm lightly above Sarah's heart and listened, not for words, but for the tender negotiation happening at the doorway between worlds. The child hovered there with the solemn curiosity of someone choosing a room from many, deciding where to place the first small sound that would belong only to this life. In Luna's perception, a dozen beginnings unfolded side by side, a cry followed by swift calm, a quiet arrival that needed coaxing, a breath that came late but true. None of them were wrong. They were different versions of the same love finding its way. On the next wave, the child turned with purposeful grace, as if guided by the music of a place she remembered. When the baby finally arrived, sliding into the world with a soft cry that sounded like recognition rather than protest, Luna felt the profound rightness of the moment across all its gentle dimensions. She wrapped the child and laid her on Sarah's chest, watching the small mouth test the shape of belonging. "Welcome," Luna whispered. A blessing spoken so quietly, it felt like a secret they all agreed to keep. She felt every nearby reality lean toward this one in approval, like relatives applauding from adjoining rooms. Understanding that another soul had successfully chosen this particular reality from among infinite loving options. Later, when the house slept and gratitude had softened into awe, Luna stepped back into the snow-sweet night. The village roofs were sugared with light, and the reflection pool wore a thin shell of ice that held the stars without breaking them. Walking home through air that tasted of apples and winter dreams, she carried the understanding that her gift was maturing into something both simpler and more profound. She was learning to serve as a bridge between the world of infinite possibilities and the specific needs of each soul's journey, helping others find their way to the wholeness that waited just beyond what they thought was possible. Birth, she realized, was a kind of ferry. She didn't drag boats across, but stayed with the current, oars in the water, singing the channel open for souls brave enough to choose this reality from among all the gentle variations that danced at the edges of existence. That night, as she sat by the dying fire with chamomile tea and the quiet satisfaction of work well done, Luna understood that some teachings could only be received in solitude, when the heart had space to discover its own depths without familiar anchors. She was becoming not just someone who could perceive gentle realities, but someone who could help others navigate their own crossings between what was and what tenderly wanted to become, one sacred threshold at a time. The morning after Sarah's birth carried the particular stillness that follows safe crossings, when the world seems to exhale with collective relief and ordinary light takes on the quality of blessing. Luna walked to Hannah's workshop through air that tasted of new snow and old wisdom, carrying the quiet satisfaction of work well done and stories that wanted to be shared with understanding ears. Iris looked up from her loom as Luna entered, her hands never pausing in their steady rhythm, but her eyes holding the patient attention of someone who had learned to listen for the deeper currents beneath surface conversation. The shuttle moved through winter blue threads, with the unhurried confidence that comes when fingers and heart have found their proper partnership, creating cloth that would hold warmth without complaint. "You were called in the night," Iris observed gently, reading the particular quality of peace in Luna's shoulders. The way her movements carried the careful satisfaction of someone who had helped tend a threshold between worlds. "Oh, your hands say so." Luna settled beside the loom and told the story in the way she had learned, not through facts but through feelings, describing the small negotiations she had sensed between courage and fear, the quiet conversation at the doorway where a soul had chosen its moment with exquisite care. As she spoke, Iris adjusted the tension on her threads with movements that seemed to echo the rhythm of Luna's words. "Warp and weft," Iris murmured, when the story found its natural pause, her voice carrying the weight of understanding earned through seasons of patient craft. "The warp is the structure we can trust, the promises we keep, the love that holds steady. The weft is what we choose, breath by breath, thread by thread. Pull too tight and the cloth narrows, forgets how to be generous. Leave it too loose and it can't hold what it's meant to carry." Luna felt these words settle into place, like seeds finding proper soil. "Sometimes I want to guide every thread toward perfect alignment," she admitted. "Then I feel the whole weaving resist, reminding me that beauty includes the small irregularities that let fabric breathe." "Nothing worth keeping likes to be forced," Iris smiled, her hands demonstrating the gentle firmness that allowed threads to find their own best relationship. "Your gift sounds like learning to read tension, sensing when to add pressure and when to offer space, helping each moment discover its own rhythm." They shared bread and cheese while snow painted the windows with lace patterns, and Iris taught Luna about edges, how the selvages held without pulling inward, creating boundaries that protected rather than constrained. "Do you hem your days?" Iris asked with the casual wisdom of someone who had learned to tend her own rhythms. "Choose small rituals that say enough. A cup of warm milk, one song hummed into the settling dark, a candle placed where shadows can admire its light without being banished." That evening, they practiced the ritual together, mirror-angled to gather the last light into a soft pool on the workshop wall, a wordless lullaby that helped the room remember how to rest. The final candle extinguished with gratitude, rather than haste. The space itself seemed to sigh with relief, as if grateful to be given permission to stop working and simply exist in peaceful stillness. Walking home through snow that whispered secrets to her footsteps, Luna carried new understanding about the art of gentle boundaries, the wisdom of knowing when to engage her gift and when to let moments unfold without guidance. She touched the loose thread on Vera's cord around her wrist and felt it flutter like a small banner of permission, reminding her that even the most carefully woven life needed spaces for breath, for surprise, for the unexpected kindness that arrived when control loosened its grip just enough to let love choose its own expression. In the distance, the reflection pool held winter's silence like a promise kept, and Luna felt the quiet anticipation of spring's eventual return, carrying with it the voices of those who had learned their own ways of tending the spaces between what was and what tenderly wanted to become. Winter's deepening brought Luna to the reflection pool with increasing frequency, drawn by a quality of stillness that seemed to hold teachings meant for solitude. The ice formed in thin sheets that created windows. Between worlds, oval panes of open water set among cloudy glass where the reeds leaned in like neighbors, sharing important secrets. She began to understand that the pool responded to the quality of attention she brought to it. If she arrived with hurry, the surface kept its distance, mirroring only sky and passing clouds. But when she set Tobias's mirror on the old bridge rail, angled to gather quiet light, and pressed her thumb to the cherry wood worrystone while taking 3 slow breaths, the water seemed to remember her, the way a beloved book falls open to a familiar page. In those moments, the pool revealed not prophecies, but connections, showing Luna the gentle ripples that spread outward from every act of kindness she had helped tend. She saw Tobias in the mountain village, his transformed presence now carrying healing rather than restless sorrow, teaching the grandmother's patterns to children who would carry them forward. The baker's wife appeared alongside her husband, their marriage strengthened by the tenderness with which his embarrassment had been met, their children unconsciously learning that accidents could be welcomed with laughter rather than shame. Sarah and her new daughter drifted through the water's vision, the baby's patient arrival having touched not just the immediate family, but the entire community's understanding of what it meant to welcome new life with trust rather than urgency. Each person Luna had helped learn to tend the spaces between what was and what could be had become another voice in the vast conversation that helped love find its way through whatever circumstances arose. Luna began keeping a quiet ledger beside her window, recording these glimpses not as instructions but as reminders of the web that connected all gentle choices. When wind stills at reed tips, mirror turned one finger with east, she wrote in careful script. Surface softens, glimpses arrive like cousins visiting. Offer tea to whoever needs listening tomorrow. Once, the water showed her an elder she didn't recognize, sitting alone with hands like winter bark, struggling with words that wouldn't arrange themselves properly around his grief. The next afternoon, following a path she seldom took, Luna found the cottage that matched the vision. She sat with him and let the room choose slower rhythms, understanding that her gift wasn't about preventing every sorrow, but about helping love find its way through whatever darkness existed. As spring whispered its first promises through the frozen air, Luna reflected on what the pool had taught her. These visions of parallel realities and connected choices weren't meant to be chased or changed, but simply witnessed, gentle reminders of the infinite creativity that surrounded every moment. Her role wasn't to control the vast complexity of human experience, but to participate in it, with as much presence and care as she could manage. Walking home through air that carried the distant scent of awakening earth, Luna touched the loose thread on Vera's cord and felt it flutter with her breathing. She was learning that the deepest mysteries weren't meant to be solved but lived, that her gift was part of the same intelligence that helped flowers know when to bloom and guided hearts toward forgiveness when they were ready. The pool had shown her that while infinite possibilities existed across gentle dimensions, the profound gift was to love fully within this chosen reality, to tend this particular garden of existence with complete presence, trusting that every small kindness contributed to a tapestry too vast and beautiful for any single perspective to comprehend, yet intimate enough to be touched by one heart, choosing gentleness, again and again, in each precious moment as it arrived. Spring arrived like a patient conversation between frost and sunlight, and with it came Ansel, his approach marked by the particular quality of someone who had spent the intervening seasons learning to translate wonder into words that others might carry home. Luna felt his presence while gathering the first tender shoots of chamomile from Vera's garden, her hands pausing over leaves that held winter's memory and summer's promise in equal measure. He knocked with the gentle formality of someone returning to a place where profound questions had found their proper soil, and when Vera opened the door, his greeting carried the warmth of understanding deepened by distance and reflection. His traveling pack bore new weight, not just the accumulated dust of scholarly journeys, but the careful burden of insights that had been tested against experience and found worthy of preservation. "I've been learning to listen the way you taught." "Me," Ansel said, settling into the chair that had become his during those earlier conversations, accepting Vera's tea with the reverence of someone who had discovered that simple gestures often carried the deepest wisdom. Not to extract or examine, but to create space where truth might choose to reveal itself. From his pack he withdrew a leather journal filled with careful script and delicate sketches, not diagrams meant to dissect mystery, but gentle maps of emotional terrain that honored complexity without demanding singular outcomes. The pages rustled with the particular sound of ideas that had been lived rather than merely thought, and Luna recognized her own insights, translated into language that could travel beyond familiar boundaries while preserving their essential gentleness. "What shall we call what we're creating?" Luna asked, turning through pages that felt like conversations she could continue after closing them, margins left wide for readers to add what kindness had taught them in their own rooms. "Maybe it's a lantern," Ansel said thoughtfully, watching how afternoon light moved across the water when Luna angled Tobias's mirror just so. Not to show a single path, but to help people recognize the paths they already carry, the wisdom they've been gathering without knowing it had a name. Together, they spent the following weeks refining what would become not a treatise on supernatural abilities, but a gentle exploration of radical empathy, the understanding that consciousness might exist in relationship with infinite possibilities, and that some souls were called to help love choose its kindest expression in each specific reality. Ansel documented not phenomena but practices, the art of taking 3 breaths before responding, the wisdom of choosing the softest true thing one could say, the importance of leaving one thread loose so the weaving could breathe. "This isn't about you," Ansel assured Luna as they walked to the reflection pool on his final evening, the water accepting twilight like an old friend. "It's about permission, helping others recognize that their intuitions about kindness, their sense of emotional weather, their ability to feel where healing wants to bloom, these aren't accidents but gifts that can be consciously developed." When the slender volume began to travel, one copy tucked behind jars at the bakery, another carried upriver by a ferryman who appreciated the chapter about listening for weight before pushing off from shore, the village noticed something subtle. People paused a little longer before answering difficult questions. Doors opened 2 inches wider when strangers knocked. The habit of choosing gentler versions of ordinary moments spread like warmth taken from a shared fire without leaving anyone colder. Luna began receiving letters from distant places. A young woman in the eastern valleys, who had recognized her ability to sense the emotional weather of entire communities. An old fisherman who discovered that his uncanny knowledge of which nets to cast was actually sensitivity to currents of possibility that flowed beneath each decision. Each account felt like discovering distant relatives, souls who spoke dialects of the same fundamental language of gentle influence. Standing by the pool where her journey had begun, watching stars emerge one by one in both sky and reflection, Luna understood that her gift had always been part of something larger than herself. The lantern they had created would help ensure that future generations might recognize and develop their own abilities to sense where kindness wanted to bloom, to offer their small strength to help reality choose its most loving expression. As Ansel prepared to continue his journey, carrying new understanding that would reshape his life's work, Luna felt the quiet satisfaction of seeds planted in fertile ground, The cottage settled into evening with a different quality of stillness. Not emptiness, but the gathered peace that comes when important work has found its proper form and begun its patient journey into the world. Vera moved through her evening tasks with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to trust the timing of all things, and in the gentle hush between one breath and the next, Luna sensed that their shared story was approaching a threshold, where new chapters would begin, carrying forward the wisdom they had tended together through all the seasons of learning to help love find its way home. Summer deepened into a different quality of stillness after Ansel's departure, the cottage holding conversations in lower keys, as if the very air had learned to listen more carefully. Luna first noticed the change in Vera's morning rituals, the way her weathered hands lingered over the blue cups that had witnessed so many important conversations, how she paused on the threshold to watch light move across the garden with the particular attention of someone memorizing beloved details. "I find myself putting things in order I didn't know were crooked," Vera said one afternoon, sorting her collection of healing herbs with movements that carried the weight of ceremony rather than mere tidying. "Not to hold on, little moon, but to learn how to loosen my grip in just the right places." She pressed the worn leather satchel into Luna's hands, the gesture carrying the quiet authority of a river choosing its course. "Your hands know more than healing now. They know how to hold space for the complete truth of what it means to be human." "You're teaching me about a different kind of crossing," Luna said, understanding settling in her chest like a bird finding its proper roost. "The way souls move between realities, when their work in one form is complete." Vera's smile carried the warmth of someone who had learned to meet life's deepest mysteries with a curiosity rather than resistance. "Gifts like yours are meant to be held within relationship, but they're also meant to grow beyond the boundaries of any single connection. You've learned to tend the spaces between what is and what could be. Now you're ready to help others discover their own capacity for such tending." The weeks that followed carried the quality of a gentle ritual, each day deepening Luna's understanding of the sacred responsibility she was inheriting. Vera showed her the deeper patterns of healing work, how to read the emotional weather of entire seasons, when to offer remedies, and when to simply witness whatever sorrow or joy was asking to be held. The art of helping souls navigate their crossings with maximum grace. When the time came, it arrived with the natural inevitability of autumn following summer. Kyle appeared at the door as evening painted the sky in shades of letting go, his presence steady as always, but carrying new weight, as if he too could sense the threshold approaching. Iris came with a shawl she and Hannah had woven, threads the color of river stones and late roses. One end deliberately left loose, so the fabric could breathe with whatever transitions it might witness. They found Vera in her chair by the reflection pool, watching stars emerge in water that held memory like a patient book. Her breathing had grown spacious, each exhale carrying the particular peace that comes when important work has been completed and found good. "It feels like going home by a path I've walked 1,000 times in my sleep," Vera murmured, her voice as steady as ever but softer, like music played at the edge of hearing. "I want only one promise from you, Luna. Promise me you will let the work be easy when it can be, and brave when it must." Luna took her mentor's hand and felt the moment balance between infinite gentle possibilities, farewells spoken with too many words or too few, tears that wouldn't stop or silence that said everything. She chose the version that matched the evening's breath. "I promise," she said, and the promise settled into the space between them like a stone that knew it belonged. They lit a single candle, the same ritual they had shared during storms, a small beacon for whatever needed to find its way. Luna angled Tobias's silver mirror so the flame doubled, then tripled, creating gentle suggestions that love always knew how to multiply itself. She began the low melody that had calmed so many labors, and the room took up the tune, floorboards, teapot, even the old clock finding the rhythm of a passage done without haste. Vera's final breath arrived not as a breaking, but as a completion, like water deciding it had always been part of the sky. The room held steady. The candle flame remained constant. Outside, the evening gathered itself with the patience of someone waiting by a familiar gate. In her sideways seeing, Luna perceived Vera's spirit, moving through infinite variations of homecoming. Welcomed by ancestors and beloved friends, across all the gentle dimensions where love learned to exist without boundaries. The transition was not a departure, but an expansion, like a song that continued in keys beyond immediate hearing. Later, at the reflection pool where her own journey had begun, Luna watched starlight take root in water that seemed to pulse with quiet approval. She understood that tomorrow she would walk the village paths carrying Vera's wisdom in new forms, not as replacement, but as continuation. The current had widened. The work would be easy when it could be, brave when it must. And in the soft space between one breath and the next, Luna felt Vera's presence join the vast, patient conversation that would continue guiding her hands, teaching her that love finds countless ways to express itself across infinite realities, and that some gifts are meant to be passed forward, like flames lighting new candles, each one adding its voice to the endless, gentle song that helps souls find their way home through whatever weather is theirs to weather. The reflection pool still shimmered with glimpses of adjacent moments, and Luna touched the loose thread on her wrist, feeling it flutter like a small banner of permission to trust whatever transitions were asking to unfold, understanding that she was now the bridge between worlds, ready to help others discover the infinite gentleness that surrounded every moment of choosing love over fear, presence over absence, trust over the need to control what could only be tended with patient, open hands. Morning entered the cottage as it always had, moving across shelves and cups and the chair by the door, but it found new hands opening the latch. Luna lifted Vera's satchel by its well-worn strap and settled it across her shoulder, the leather carrying the familiar scent of thyme and beeswax that steadied her as she stepped over the threshold. The village breathed in recognition of this quiet transition, doors opening 2 inches wider, neighbors letting silence do the welcoming that words would have rushed and tangled. Her first call came before noon, when Mrs. Holloway arrived with her youngest son, Jamie, now 8 years old with grass-stained knees and eyes that carried the particular weight of witnessing something too large for young understanding to hold comfortably. His grandfather had passed peacefully in his sleep, but the boy kept asking where people go when their bodies stop working, questions that hovered in the cottage air like moths seeking light. Luna knelt beside Jamie with the patient attention Vera had taught her, feeling the familiar expansion of her awareness as she sensed all the gentle ways this conversation could unfold. She reached for Tobias's silver mirror and angled it to catch afternoon light, creating a soft pool of brightness on the worn wooden table. "What do you remember most about your grandfather?" she asked, her voice carrying the quiet certainty that had become her signature. "How he hummed while he worked in the garden," Jamie said, his small voice steady despite his confusion. "And how he always knew which plants needed water just by looking at them." Luna tilted the mirror, so light danced between its surface and the room around them. "Look here. Do you see how the light lives in the mirror? But it also lives in the room and in the window and in the sun that's shining far away. It's all the same light, just visiting different places." The boy studied the reflected brightness with the serious attention children bring to important mysteries. "Like grandfather's humming?" he asked slowly. "It came from him, but now I can still hear it in my head. And in the garden when the wind moves through the beans he planted." "Exactly like that," Luna smiled, feeling the moment choose its most loving expression. Some parts of people are like light. They can be in many places at once, including inside the hearts of everyone who loved them. Your grandfather's kindness, his way of knowing what growing things needed, those parts of him are still here, still taking care of the world through everyone who remembers how he showed love. Understanding settled in Jamie's eyes, like seeds finding proper soil, and Mrs. Holloway's shoulders relaxed with the gratitude of a mother whose child had been helped to carry sorrow without drowning in it. That evening brought Mina's labor, urgent but not frantic, and Luna found herself moving with authority that felt both inherited and entirely her own. She angled the mirror where hearthlight could pool softly, hummed the low river song that had helped so many crossings, and felt the baby turn with the inevitability of tide changing direction. When little Saul arrived into light, her cry sounded like agreement with a choice well made. Word of these tender ministrations rippled through the village lanes, not as news, but as reassurance. People began arriving at Luna's door not to ask what she could see, but to sit inside a room where choosing kindness felt easier. At night, she walked to the reflection pool and stood on the bridge where her life had first spoken its name. The water kept its secrets and offered its invitations in the same breath. And Luna understood she was now the midwife for all the small brave crossings of ordinary days, helping souls find their way home through whatever weather was theirs to weather. Years moved through the village like gentle conversations, each season bringing its own lessons, and Luna found herself settling into her role with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to trust the rhythm of necessary things. The cottage breathed differently now, filled with the particular quiet that comes when important work has found its proper hands. Mornings brought their familiar calls, births that chose their own timing, sorrows that needed patient witnessing, the endless small healings that wove community together like threads in Iris's careful loom. But it was in the evenings, when the day's work settled into gratitude, that Luna discovered the deepest teachings waiting by the reflection pool. She no longer arrived seeking visions or guidance, but simply to sit with the water that had held her first breath in this world. The pool had become her oldest teacher, patient as stone, deep as the questions that lived beneath all answers. Cale joined her often, carrying stories from his travels that enriched their shared understanding of how kindness expressed itself in different valleys, different voices. He had learned his own way of reading the current between what was and what could gently become, helping ferry passengers not just across rivers, but through the emotional weather of their journeys. When he spoke of the mountain village, where Tobias now taught children to carve with patience rather than haste, or the northern settlement, where a young woman had learned to sense the healing properties of plants by listening to their quiet songs, Luna felt the profound satisfaction of seeds planted in fertile ground. "It's like watching a conversation continue in voices we helped learn to speak," Kyle observed one evening, his weathered hands steady as he whittled a small bird from cherrywood, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight. "Your gift was never about you alone, was it? It was about teaching others to recognize their own capacity for such seeing." Luna nodded, understanding settling in her chest like a bird finding its proper roost. She had spent years learning to perceive infinite gentle realities, but the deeper wisdom was learning when to simply be present with the reality that had chosen itself. The pool's surface reflected stars without trying to hold them, and in that patient receiving, she found her truest teaching. Iris visited regularly, her hands now teaching young weavers the art of leaving one thread loose so the cloth could breathe with whatever weather it might encounter. Her marriage to Elias had deepened into the kind of partnership that made ordinary tasks feel like shared prayers, their home filled with the quiet satisfaction of two people who had learned to grow in the same direction. When she sat with Luna by the water's edge, their conversation moved like shuttle through warp, creating patterns of understanding that strengthened with each passing. "I keep thinking about what Vera used to say," Iris murmured one twilight, watching how the reflection pool caught the last light and held it gently. About how some gifts are meant to be held within relationship, but also meant to grow beyond any single connection. "You've taught this whole village to listen for the spaces between what is and what wants to become." The truth of this settled around them like evening mist. Luna's gift had multiplied itself through every person who had learned to pause before responding to difficulty, to choose the softest true thing they could say, to trust that kindness would find its way if given the smallest opening. The baker now hummed while he worked, understanding that bread rose better when tended with patience rather than urgency. The miller had learned to read the emotional weather of grain, knowing when to grind and when to let wheat rest in its own timing. As autumn painted the world in shades of letting go, Luna felt her own story approaching not an ending, but a deepening. Like water deciding it had always been part of the sky, she spent longer hours by the pool, not seeking but offering, gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment of understanding, appreciation for the infinite gentleness that surrounded every breath, every choice, every small act of love that rippled outward through dimensions she would never see but could always serve. In the soft space between one breath and the next, Luna perceived herself as part of an ancient tradition of bridge builders, souls called to sense where kindness wanted to bloom, and to offer their small strength to help it choose this reality over all the others that danced at the edges of possibility. Her gift connected her to everyone who had ever chosen gentleness when they could have chosen force, who had sensed the places where love wanted to take root and helped create the conditions for it to flourish. The reflection pool still shimmered with glimpses of adjacent moments, But Luna no longer needed to see them to trust their presence. She had learned the deepest lesson the water could teach, that while infinite possibilities existed across gentle dimensions, the profound gift was to love fully within this chosen existence, to tend this particular garden of experience with complete presence and care, understanding that every moment was a collaboration between choice and chance, and her role was to add her voice to the quiet chorus, singing each instant into its most loving expression. Walking home through air that carried the scent of wood smoke and the promise of stories yet to be told, Luna touched the loose thread on her wrist and felt it flutter like a small banner of permission, reminding her that even the most carefully tended life needed spaces for breath, for surprise, for the unexpected kindness that arrived when control loosened its grip just enough to let love choose its own expression. The work would continue, not just through her hands but through every heart that had learned to tend the spaces between what was and what tenderly wanted to become, one gentle moment at a time. The season arrived when Luna's own transition began to whisper its approach, not as shadow but as recognition, the way dawn comes to someone who has been listening through the gentle hours before light. She moved through the cottage with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to read the emotional weather of endings, setting Tobias's mirror where morning could find it first, letting each familiar object breathe in the kind of attention that becomes blessing when given without expectation. Kyle came in the afternoons with stories folded in his pockets like maps, and Iris brought her youngest daughter, Mara, whose quiet eyes carried the particular listening quality Luna remembered from her own childhood. The girl paused at thresholds, as if tuning herself to frequencies only she could hear, her small hands testing the texture of air, as if it might carry patterns waiting to be discovered. "She has the sideways seeing," Luna observed one evening, watching how Mara tilted her head toward conversations held just beyond hearing. Different from mine, but the same kindness at its heart. As autumn painted the world in shades of letting go, Luna felt the profound rightness of this recognition. Her gift had never been about her alone, but about helping others discover their own capacity for sensing where love wanted to take root. The village now held dozens of such souls, people who paused before responding to difficulty, who chose the softest true thing they could say, who trusted that kindness would find its way if given the smallest opening. On her final evening, Luna made her way to the reflection pool where her journey had begun, carrying the worn leather satchel and understanding that certain crossings prefer the company of stars to witnesses. The water welcomed her with the familiar stillness of an old friend, its surface reflecting not just sky but glimpses of all the gentle realities where her influence had helped love choose its kindest expression. She pressed Vera's cord into Mara's small hands, its loose thread lifting like a tiny flag of permission. "For remembering that the world needs room to breathe," she said, feeling the moment choose its gentlest variation. To Kale she offered the compass, not as instruction but as acknowledgement of journeys already underway. The mirror she left angled on the bridge rail, positioned to catch light for future bridge builders who would learn their own ways of helping reality choose its most loving expression. Luna's breathing grew spacious, not with effort but with ease, as if her lungs had learned the rhythm of tides returning home. In her sideways seeing, she perceived herself moving through infinite variations of this transition, welcomed by Vera and all the ancestors who had tended similar gifts across the gentle dimensions, where love learned to exist without boundaries. "It's all a conversation," she whispered to the reeds, her voice soft as settling water. "And love is the language that helps every voice find its way home." Her passing was experienced not as departure, but as expansion, like water remembering it had always been part of the sky. The reflection pool still shimmers with glimpses of adjacent moments, and sometimes visitors pause there, sensing the infinite gentleness that surrounds each choice, each breath, each quiet moment of being alive. In the soft space between realities, Luna's presence continues to weave peace into the fabric of existence, a reminder that we are all held within infinite possibilities, all loved across every dimension, all finding our way home through the gentle current of what is, and what tenderly might have been. Thanks for spending this time with us, exploring the infinite gentle realities that surround each moment. Sleep well, knowing that across all dimensions you are loved exactly as you are. Everything's going to be okay.